Typically, we think drugs are bad, and typically we label taking something like acid to avoid something in our lives instead of the opportunity to take acid and confront it. Former attorney Julie Cyvonne sheds a new light through all the propaganda on this when you're given the right amount with the right facilitator. It can be life changing, this microdosing. This was a very cool episode for me as I shared in my first book my exploration of psychedelics myself. However, Julie has a way more robust and scientific approach to doing this and why it could potentially open up how you see the world. So let's roll right in. All right, welcome to the Work Sucks, but I Like It podcast. Today we've got Julie Cyvonne, former attorney turned high performance psychedelic coach who teaches women how to use psychedelics as tools for focus, emotional regulation, and sustainable success. She's helped over 300 people safely reconnect to themselves through intentional plant medicine experiences, subconscious reprogramming, and integration work. Julie, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So, for every guest, Julie, I always ask, how do you define work? Just so we can get a foundation here for this episode. How
Ooh,
do you define work?
work. Work is anything that you put like directed effort and energy and attention toward, I would say. And hopefully, you can get paid for it if we feel like we're working. Hopefully there's that exchange there. But there's plenty of things that we work at that we don't get paid for. Like I went to the gym earlier today, and I definitely put in work, but unfortunately, no one is sponsoring me as of yet.
Awesome. Cool. So, that's a great definition. So, let's build on that. So, the energy you're putting towards today, tell us about this. I'm very curious to hear attorney to psychedelic coach. Can you walk us through the work you do currently today?
Yeah, okay. So like let me think about some different ways that I work, right? So I work one-to-one with women. Had a call with one of my one-to-one clients. She is a recent start. So a lot of that work was around getting her set up with her microdosing practice. Because some people are like, "Oh, well, you don't I understand the misconception, like, you don't really need a facilitator to microdose because it's sub-perceptual, right? Like, unlike a journey or a ceremonial dose or a macro dose, whatever someone might refer to it as in the setting that they're doing it, you're not incapacitated in any way. You can drive, you can operate heavy machinery, and so you don't need a facilitator in the sense of, like, you don't need someone to like almost take care of you in that way. And if you want to microdose with a larger like intention and purpose for long-term sustainable change, there's certainly a practice to it, right? So I could go to the gym and I could just like do stuff and use the machines and run on the treadmill, but I'm currently working with a trainer for a very specific reason who knows how to create like a push workout, a pull workout, like a sprint workout. And so it's just like are you going to I am of the mind where I like to maximize time, right? And I like to think that I'm getting somewhere with a good speed and a sense of direction. So having a facilitator for your microdosing practice is going to help make accomplishing the goal um tangible, if not certainly much easier and quicker and more sustainable. So after we got set up with our microdosing practice, we jumped right in, right into like what is she looking to achieve from this process. And for her, it's a lot of she is recently divorced, and a lot of the reason she got divorced, a lot of what she was experiencing in her marriage was feeling like she couldn't use her voice, right? Like her husband was directing all of these things, and so feeling more confident. And also, she has this persona that she feels is it's not a persona, I don't wanna say it's fake, right? But this, like, bubbly, happy person, but then people don't take her seriously, and she's feeling like it's time for her to come into her own, right? So, okay, that's one of my one-to-one clients, but I recently ran a live round of one of my programs called Unbreakable, where the program is delivered to the participants every day via text, but then they got to come into the group chat, and ask questions and receive further support, and that's something I don't run live a lot. And then sometimes I do facilitate retreats. I host retreats where people can come have a full dose in an intentional guided setting. And then I'm facilitating breath work. I'm like facilitating these breakthrough integration exercises, the journey itself. And so my job really does look different. The work that I do looks different depending on which chapter or which book we're reading that day.
Cool. No, that's awesome. So, I definitely want to dive into the psychedelics for sure. But walk us through the moment when it sucked being an attorney to saying, I need to do psychedelics. What was that kind of like transition?
There were 2 pretty big, like, "this sucks" moments. One of them was I definitely had a life that was very enviable on Instagram, right? I mean, I was a young attorney. I went right from undergrad to law school to practicing. So I had letters behind my name. I had a job, a six-figure salary. I had a house, the fancy shoes, the purses. I went on awesome trips. Like it looked like I was having a lot of fun. I would also party really hard on the weekend. And a lot of that was because I was deeply unhappy, right? And I was just like looking for a way to kind of shut off my brain. And alcohol was that way. And so if you looked at my life on Instagram, you'd be like, wow, she is having so much fun. You know, she's not even 30, shalala. But there was a night, and it was the winter, I believe, because I could think I can see a Christmas tree. But I'm sitting in my living room in my house that I had at the time, right? And I'm just sobbing. I'm like, Why is my brain like this? Like, why do I have so much anxiety? Because I had gone to therapy, I had tried Prozac, I'd done the mindfulness and the working out and all these things that people tell you, like, that's how you fix your anxiety or whatever, and it was not working for me. And I had this moment of true, like, despair, of a total lack of hope, of feeling like it's never gonna get better. This is almost like a life sentence. I'm gonna have to live with this. And that was very disheartening for me. And then there was a moment in my career where I was working for a judge, and, for people I know, like, the legal system seems really complex, and it's like, "How does this even work? What's happening?" I know probably in the news, people are like, "How does the judicial system work?" But judges have clerks, right? Definitely, like, appellate court judges, to help them write all their decisions, and so I was working for an appellate court in Illinois, and there was this case, there were these 2 guys, black men, walking through an alleyway, and the facts of the case were essentially that a cop said they saw, like, the 2 guys reach for each other, they didn't see the guys, like, ever touch, and they didn't see anything pass hands, and so in a criminal case, the standard is a reasonable doubt. You need to prove that the crime happened beyond a reasonable doubt, and so I'm reviewing all of this stuff, and I'm getting ready to, write this opinion up and have my judge look at it, and I go in to talk to him. He is an old cranky white man who is a former cop, and he was like, "2 black men don't walk down the alleyway toward each other unless there's drugs involved," and, like, you're like, "They're guilty," and I was like, "Whoa," like, I just can't believe, like, this is the world that I'm living in, and we had just such fundamentally different viewpoints of the world, but it was just, like, it broke my spirit a little bit that, like, that is it felt like there was no chance for this guy, It felt like he was doomed because of the color of his skin, because of where he was, and who knows, like, maybe he was, right? Maybe he was dealing drugs, but I did not see the facts to prove it, and I was like, "Wow, this hurts my soul, I can't do this."
So interesting. So that was sort of a catalyst for you to sort of subconsciously then try psychedelics to kind of get out of the state?
Oh, that's so interesting. No, no, not at all.
Okay.
Um, okay, where does that all line up? So I'll be completely honest. I was a dare kid, right? Like I signed the little pledge. I was like, drugs are bad, psychedelics specifically, right? They tell you all this propaganda. I remember hearing like psychedelics scramble your brain. Which thinking about that through an objective lens as an adult, I'm thinking like, what does that mean? Like that doesn't mean anything, right? Like unless someone's getting a lobotomy and someone's sticking something up their nose and like swirling it around, like you you can't scramble your brain. It's not an egg. And so I totally was so subscribed to this, like, yeah, psychedelics are bad. I guess there was a point where I think I was still practicing. And a friend had said, like, I have done acid before. Like, it's a really awesome experience. Like, would you want to experience this too? And it was someone who I really trusted. And so it's interesting, even though I didn't know what I know now about psychedelics, she kind of set up this experience for me and she controlled for something in the psychedelic world that we call set and setting. Is your mindset good when you go into an experience, and is your environment safe so that you feel safe, right? And I don't think she was trying to, but she did control for those 2 things and invited me to have this experience with her, and so I did, and I was like, "Wow, you're right, like, this is so awesome. This is not, like, at all what they told us in DARE," but that was my one sort of singular psychedelic experience, and then I didn't have another one for, like, 2 years. So it wasn't like that wasn't a gateway, it was just more like I felt I went to law school because I just wanted to help people. I wanted to make a difference, and then when I had that moment of my boss being like, "Nope, they were black and they were in an alley and they were dealing drugs," I was like, "Wow, so the people that I feel like need our help more than anyone else, like, they're just never gonna get it," and that made me it really, like, gave me the ick about
Mm.
law and think like, "What am I doing?"
So how did you start integrating, I guess, psychedelics into your life? So you dabble with it, you took some time off. How did you like then say, I need this to be a part of my sort of mental training, if you will?
Perfect, yes, okay, so, it was not like a straight, like, hard left or right or whatever, that some people might think. So what really happened was I, I was feeling very disheartened and I went into different practice areas. So I went into special education law. And then my last kind of ditch effort in the law was I was working with a nonprofit. I had moved to San Diego and I was working with a nonprofit that supported human trafficking survivors. What some people might not realize is that people get trafficked and they stay in the trafficking world because, like, for instance, if it's sex trafficking, like their pimp or something will like get them set up with drugs and then they'll call the cops on them and then the cops will arrest them and the pimp will pay bail and then they always feel indebted to the like it's like, oh, that's more money you owe me, and then they can't go do anything because they have a record. It's a very sad, very complicated process. But I think a lot of people don't. I think we have this idea that like human trafficking is like taken, right? And it's not. It is not like taken. And so that was good work. I mean, how could you not feel like, wow, I'm making a difference? These women, mostly women, really, really need this. Right. And so it did. It made me feel better, but I still just didn't like the process of the law. And I think a huge issue for that with me was like the time. So there's also a lot, like the legal process does take a lot of time. And it's part of our rights that we have a certain amount of time to respond. And it's not just like, okay, well, you have 24 hours to get like to respond to this, pleading or whatever. And I understand the time is necessary and it does take months, sometimes years. But for someone who struggles a little bit with impatience, like, oh my God, like I cannot keep doing this, right? And so it was the pandemic. I also have this analogy that I feel really came true I felt it where like I feel like life is a river and water is God or the water is the universe or higher order intelligence. And we're all in the river. And the river is pushing you towards your path of your soul's highest evolution, but you have free will. So you can be a salmon, you can swim upstream, you can be a starfish, and you can cling to the rock. And I was clinging to the rock of being a lawyer, and then the water just whoop, like slapped me, right? And pushed me off the rock. And I was listening to this podcast during the pandemic, and this woman said, "Hey, do you want to get certified to coach?" And it was just, I didn't even think about it. It was a very intuitive yes. I was like, oh, that's weird. Okay, like let's sign up for this coaching program, right? So I got certified to coach, got certified with the International Coaching Federation. And so I'm coaching and I'm doing a lot of executive coaching. I'm doing a lot of leadership coaching, which makes sense, right? Like I'm used to working with these people. I'm used to working with C-suite individuals, etc. It felt good, and I felt like I was getting better in terms of my anxiety and depression, like, coaching was helping me as well, like, learning these coaching tools, but it still felt like there was this stickiness, like, I don't know if you've ever gotten gum in your hair, but if you get gum in your hair, you're like, "Man, like, I think I'm just gonna have to chop this piece off, like, I cannot get it all the way out," right? There was gum in and the anxiety was the gum in my hair, and, I was running a nonprofit out of LA at the same time, and one of our partners who was an expat living in Colombia, he came back to the States and said, "Hey, we've never met like in real life. Let's grab dinner." And then from there, he's like, "I'm investing in a company. I would love for you to come see it. Will you come give me your opinion?" Sure, like, let's go. And so we go out there and it's a microdosing company. And he's like, "Take these microdoses." And I was like, "What do you mean, Steve?" And so on the back of the package, it says, "Take one every day for 3 days, and then don't take them for 2 days, and then repeat for 30 days." And I'm like, "Okay, but like," even in the acid experience that I shared, right? My first experience, she told me, like, what was like she was facilitating me through the experience. Steve was just like, "Take these things." And I'm thinking there's gotta be more to it than this, right? So I start researching. I worked in a lab in undergrad, so, like, I know my way around a research paper, I understand a statistically significant result. I'm reading research papers. I read How to Change Your Mind by Michael Pollan, which is a great book I really recommend. And then I started taking different, you can take different courses, and I kind of was hodgepodging things on the internet to learn about this. I did it on myself. My first 30 days were so transformational, microdosing. And I was doing all these things with it and sharing it on the internet because that's what, you do in the digital age, right? And people like, "Well, teach me how to do it." And that's where my business started. And it's been this way for 4 years and I love it.
How would you describe that's really awesome, Julie. How would you describe what the psychedelics do? to you, right?
Yeah.
Why do we even need them, I guess? How have we gotten to this point where we need psychedelics to get to this state?
So I always approach it from the functional perspective. I don't like looking at too much at like the neurotransmitters simply because we don't actually really know, for instance, what effect serotonin has on depression, right? We get prescribed these SSRIs, but more and more research is coming out to say SSRIs are a placebo and that we don't understand serotonin's effect on depression. What I like to look at is a very functional perspective of like what can we see on an fMRI scan and how does that like impact yeah, how does that impact us, our brains, and how we feel? So there's a very well-known picture. It's a side by side of like your brain normally, and specifically a brain that experiences anxiety, depression, OCD, addiction, or PTSD. You might be thinking, well, those are all different things, and yes, but it's almost like they're all flavors of ice cream. But at the end of the day, they are all ice cream. So if we think about anxiety, it's like a preoccupation, a worry about the future. Depression is often like a looping of past events, especially situational depression, right? OCD, like a repetitive behavior, PTSD, can't stop thinking about that memory, addiction, like coming back and back to drinking. And so it is a lot of rigidity and it's a lot of looping, and there's not a lot of new connections being made. In fact, it's like the same connection being reinforced time and time and time again. So on this one side of this image, there's that brain, and there's not a lot of like, we'll just say activity. And when I say activity, I don't mean someone's dumb, right? But it just means the same connections, like the same two points are always being made. They're always being reinforced. And then you see a brain on psychedelics, and what that is doing, it's so lit up. There's like these new parts that never talk are talking, and it's just like all these novel connections. That's an increase in entropy and an increase in neuroplasticity. So again, some brains just experience like it's like they don't have a lot of gas in the fire, right? And we want the gas, but we want the gas to be directed. So it's not enough to say like we're increasing neuroplasticity. We want to direct the neuroplasticity, which is why it's so important to microdose and pair it with certain things that like the research will call intentional relearning tools. I like to say they're tools of integration, whether it's journaling, meditation. It's really about finding what works for you, right? Because my practice is not what's going to be most effective for you. We had to find like the things that really get excited about, because I don't want this to feel like punishment for anyone either. And then my favorite thing that psychedelics do that we can see on an fMRI scan, inside our brain, there's a series of interconnected structures called the default mode network.
Mm.
And the one of the biggest players in that network is called your posterior cingulate cortex. I call the DMN your Regina George because she's mean, and specifically the posterior cingulate cortex. That's your center of self-referential thinking, and that's the little like thing in your head. It's like, man, you suck. Why did you say that? Oh my God, she thinks you're so weird. You're doing this wrong. You're dumb. You're not worth it. Like you're not good enough, right? It's that voice. And so what we see on an fMRI scan is psychedelics cool down the blood flow, right? Where normally that part of your brain is getting a lot of blood flow, we take some of that blood flow away, right? We're not shutting off that part of your brain, but you're powering it down a little bit. And when that part is quiet, wow, you could do anything, because so much of what gets in people's way from taking action is the crappy voice inside our head. We are our own biggest obstacle the vast majority of the time. That's not to say that there aren't like real external circumstances that affect people negatively, but if we could get out of our own way, anything is possible. And that's what psychedelics gave me, was that relief, because my mind was so loud, and it wasn't loud like go girl. It was loud like you suck. And shutting her up just gave me such a relief, and now I tell people, like, my brain's pretty quiet, not that I don't think, but there's not a lot of chatter, there's not a lot of open loops or open tabs.
So do you find that was really awesome? I love also the neuroscience as well. I guess for the listeners, if you were to point to this post-singular cortex, where would it be if I were to touch my head?
Well, that's such a good question. I'm pretty sure your posterior cingulate cortex is, like it's more in the back, but you'd still have to get in. Like, if you're wearing a sweatband, right? Like,
Yeah,
think about the sweatband on the back, but it's still more in your brain. Like, it's not on one of these out here. Like, your prefrontal cortex is right behind your forehead, but your posterior is like, you have to kinda jam something deeper into your brain to get to your
that's
PC.
awesome. No, thank you, Julie. So I like to study flow and, flow states. There's a couple theories. The one I like and resonate, the prefrontal cortex diminishes in activity, goes to alpha theta brain waves. right? From the high kind of beta, these thinking, thoughts and stuff. So I really resonated with your kind of description. That was really awesome. I guess a follow up question to that. So you use the, microdosing, macrodosing, depending on the levels, to get you to this brain state.
Mhm.
Walk us through the regulation of this brain state now. Like, walk us through how do you keep microdosing? Do you bring in meditation? How do you regulate this desired brain state of calm, if you will?
That's a cool question. I don't think anyone's ever really asked me this, so thank you for asking. So this is why it's so important to use a tool of integration, right? Find what really works for you because it's not we don't just want more neuroplasticity. That's kind of like a misconception. We want it directed because it can be more, but we can be like reinforcing negative patterns like scrolling on your phone, right? So I tell people like the 4 to 6 hours after you microdose really is a time when it's very important to be like intentional with what you're doing. Whether that be avoiding scrolling on your phone, whether that be taking time to like listen to a hypnosis on YouTube, right? Whatever it is, a walk outside without your phone, so many different options for what you could do at this time. As long as it's mindful, it's intentional, and it's reinforcing something you want to see more of. And then I always tell people like the magic of microdosing actually comes from taking whatever it shows you and pulling the thread through into your everyday life. I like to say that
Mm,
psychedelics are like taking a helicopter to the top of a mountain because for so many people, right, like I didn't know what it was like to have a quiet brain. If someone had been like, hey, we can turn down the volume in your brain, it would have made no sense to me because it was so pervasive. That's all I knew. And if that's all you know, then you don't think anything else is possible. But it took me to the mountaintop and showed me, like, hey, this is what it's like if your brain shuts up. And then it'll put you back down at the bottom. And it's like, but in order for that to become who you are, you still have to climb yourself. So getting that taste of what's possible is like it's an anchor point to say like, no, I can get there. So my whole philosophy is the opposite of like you have to microdose for the rest of your life or we just microdose to have a good day. It's like, no, no, no. I want you to microdose and learn how to create an amazing life long term.
I love that. I love that distinction there. So, I guess for some listeners, psychedelics, they might hear it and think of like sort of a bad connotation to us. Walk us through how you're putting more of a positive spin and why people think negatively of psychedelics.
I mean, ultimately, people think negatively of psychedelics because of government propaganda, right? I think a lot of people know that story from about the 60s or whatever, where some guy supposedly jumped off the roof of a building because he was on acid and thought he could fly and ended up dying. That never happened. That was a plant from the government. When we think about the truth of psychedelics, we can look at an experiment which has now been declassified by the government, MK Ultra. The CIA was unknowingly dosing people in San Francisco with LSD to see if it could be used as a weapon of war, as a truth serum. Well, turns out it didn't make you any more likely to tell the truth. But what it did do was raise people's levels of consciousness and start to ask questions, right? About like, hey, why are we so involved in Korea and Vietnam? Like, what is with U.S. international involvement? Like, what are we doing? What is the government doing, right? And so when I think about why, there was a big period from late 60s to I mean, really recently, where there was not funding for psychedelic research. I think a lot of it had to do with the government realizing, I don't know if we want this in people's hands. And from the rise in pharmaceuticals, there are so many documentaries you can go see, you can go watch now, right? That talk about the rise in the opioid epidemic and how those pharmaceutical companies knew very well what opioids were doing. They continued to push them, and now we are in an opioid crisis. And when we think about psychedelics, what really is happening is root cause healing. So I continue to take psychedelics because it's my work and I always want to stay current and I'm looking at how to use them in different ways, but I truly don't need them anymore. My anxiety and depression is healed. If I never took another microdosing capsule, I would be fine because my anxiety and depression is healed. People like the pharmaceutical company doesn't want to heal you. It wants to put a band-aid over a solution that you will continually need, right? Like yeah, exactly. They want more money. SSRIs are not going to heal your depression. They're going to stop you from feeling so intensely one way or the other, but it's not going to get to the root cause. And so when I think about like where is this misinformation coming from, it's government and I'm like not Miss Conspiracy Theorist. I'm really not, but it is about government control and money. And ultimately there is not money and a form of healing that is going to truly, truly heal you completely.
That's really interesting. Julie, what would you say is most challenging with your work today? And from that, what are you doing to make it not suck, if you will?
Yeah, most challenging is the misinformation piece, right? It's people thinking this is drugs. It's people thinking like, "Oh, she's just like high on mushrooms all day." And so it is really like understanding. Like I just had a post where I shared about like feeling stuck in my business and then I took acid and how the misconception is like, "Oh, she took acid to avoid." But really I took acid to confront. I took it to look at what was causing the frustration and to move through it so that I'm actually the opposite of an avoider. Whenever something comes up, I always meet it head on, like the buffalo that run into the thunderstorm, because that's the only way to come through it. And how I try to, speak to people and say, how long have you spent in this week alone avoiding I don't know, thinking about the situation going on with your partner, avoiding thinking about that thing in your business that is causing you a lot of stress. If you had a tool that would allow you to confront that thing head on and like move through it once and for all, think about the energy, the time, like everything that you would get back simply because you dealt with the thing. So it's definitely the misinformation that is the biggest, like the thing that sucks the most, and that I have to spend the most like time doing the heavy lifting around to really position it in a way that's accurate. And I never want to be clickbaity either, right? Like that's not my intention to like get a bunch of likes. I do things and I share things to paint a more honest picture about what's possible with psychedelics.
No, I like that. I like it. So I'm just really curious, Julie. What are the actual laws for
Mhm.
or against psychedelics? Does it depend on the state? Is there a federal law? Like, walk us through that, please, for a sec.
It's very much like cannabis was like 5, 10 years ago, and I believe we'll continue to see a new trend. And so Jersey, shout out New Jersey, was the most recent state to legalize psilocybin in particular for therapeutic purposes. But when we think about the law, it differs state to state, and it also differs federally. And that's like what we're seeing in cannabis, right? Which is so confusing because in states, it's like I live okay, the craziest thing, I live in Kansas City, Missouri, right? So in Missouri, weed is legal, dispensary down the street. If we cross a road that's literally called state line into Kansas, illegal. And so there's all this just like kerfuffle of you could literally walk across the street and be doing something illegal. And then we look at federal law and it's illegal. So we see states right now with Oregon, New Jersey, or Colorado. I said Denver, Colorado, even Washington D.C., which makes its own laws. It's not just like following federal prescription, right? You can go into a dispensary there and get psilocybin microdosing capsules. And then we see a state like California where like city to city, Oakland, different places, like it's decriminalized and you can get in a dispensary. It's just crazy, right? It's crazy the differences. But I do see it even in less time than it took cannabis becoming legal soon. I work with 3 companies in California. They ship nationwide, but it is like, yeah, depending on where you reside. I've never had an issue with someone not receiving their capsules in the mail, but it does differ state to state.
No, that's awesome, Julie. Well, thanks so much. If listeners of the show want to learn more about, microdosing and they want to go on a retreat with you, where's a good place for them to land? Check out.
Yeah, I mean, if you're curious about microdosing, I would honestly go. I have a really quick quiz. It's like takes 2 minutes at shouldimicrodose.net. So you can go and take that quiz, and it'll very clearly tell you like this is the right next step for you. Like you should ask more questions. Like maybe you message me, or this is definitely not for you because I hate wasting people's time. So if there's a reason that you should not microdose, that quiz will tell you. But you can find me on Instagram at Julie Cyvonne, JuliCyvonne, no spaces, no periods. Same thing for my website, juliecyvonne.com. And you can DM me. I answer all of my own DMs. My website has more information about all of my retreats. But, if you're curious, like I truly am always open to having a conversation with people about what this could look like or what it could help them with.
Awesome. Well, Julie, thanks for taking your time today on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
With a foundation in law school and her seeing the wake up call people need today with racism, for example, Julie reminds us that life is like a river. We can either flow with it or fight the current. Her functional approach is that we get into habits with our patterns in the mind where microdosing has the potential to create new connections in the brain, or rather allow the mind to flow more easily and not so locked in. She makes clear that it's not about getting addicted, but rather using it as a tool for integration to calm the chatter in the mind. Remember, success is not good luck, it's good skills. Today, the skill is to take Julie's quiz she offered on our site. See if this is a good fit for you. If not, that's okay, right? Not everyone uses the same tools in their lifetime to build the life they want to live. The point of the show is to share tools that make work not suck, and some are going to resonate with you more than others. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.
And there's a wind that blows